Hello and welcome to this edition of Elvenhome, which concentrates on the scenic work around the Canal basin. Although perhaps more my plans for scenic work than actual too much scenic work. I was meant to go down to York Model Rail Show last Saturday, but rather sadly somebody was struck by a train in the early hours of Saturday morning, and that unfortunately put paid to my journey. Never mind, undaunted, I'm already planning a trip down to York on the 13th of May, Saturday the 13th of May, for the Engage Society show that's being held in the conference centre at the National Railway Museum. And if you're an Engage Society member, you get in for nothing. Hurrah! So I'll be there on the 13th of May and looking forward to it, and really hope that nobody gets struck by a train between Morpeth and Newcastle this time. So let's get on. I've got quite a bit to show you because, thwarted in my ambition to buy things at the York Model Rail Show, I may have spent a bit of time on the internet, but more of that later. So let's have a look at what I have actually been doing over the last couple of weeks. At the end of the last episode, I showed you where I'd got to in putting in the cork for the basin. And I was happily starting to carry on working until I remembered that something was missing. Namely that, which is quite important because it tells you where things need to go below it and what space I need to be able to do the scenic work that will bring the road down to the side of the canal. And it's a good job that I put that back on because I'd cut the canal basin much too long. The basin was coming up as far as here. And once you'd put the side of the hill down, however I do it really, unless it was an absolute sheer drop, it really didn't give much room to lay things out around the yard. Now I'm going to talk a bit more about the timber yard, specifically a bit later in the video, and the work that I've been doing there. But I thought I would just bring you up to date with a couple of things in this section. One, what work I've actually done here, which wasn't as much as I wanted because I didn't go to, or rather because I was going to York. I was expecting there to pick up lots of scenic materials, which I would then be able to use and have more of the scenic work done on the layout. And of course I didn't go to York. So I spent a very pleasant Saturday morning eventually. I went to our two local model shops, but they didn't have the scenic stuff that I was after, which I really only expected to be able to get either online from the specialist scenery suppliers or in the kind of wider choice that you would have at an exhibition. And there were some specific things from Seven Models, for example, that I was going to buy. Now, some of those are now on order and will come to me, so the traders that were at York have not missed out. But I have been quite busy looking at buying some very scenic stuff, and I'll show that later in the video. But for this section, I've painted everything now the same flat brown colour, which is a standard Vallejo flat brown, which has gone on all the way around. I have, if I bring you down here a little bit, you can see that on the side where originally horses will have pulled the barges, because of course we're not using horses now. We've got as far as motor powered boats, but this line goes all the way around, all the way under the viaduct, back and round, up to the end of where the red barge is. That's all been lined in. All the walls have been put in below. This is Metcalf card, nothing more nor less than that. It doesn't need to be anything too special. One thing that was mentioned to me, and just at this moment I can't bring the individual's name to mind, but I will put up a note, I'll put something up on screen now, was about from the lock, how you would deal with the flows of water coming in to here, and whether you would have a spillway to take excess water, because obviously there's no tide here. What I was always intending to do was to copy the arrangement that there is from the Lochrin Basin at the end of the Union Canal in Edinburgh, which is that there are two fairly large grates that sit and will sit. Can you see my fingers? No, you can't see my fingers. Hold a moment. Up we go. Will sit here, and I've yet to put them on, so which allows the water level to be kept constant. And because the flow of water, if you don't do that, then the canals will overflow their banks. So I think that will be enough. But if anybody has any ideas of what I might want to do around the lock instead, do let me know. That is about, I think, the majority of the work that I was able to do up until Saturday morning, when I was due to be going down to York. What we're going to do now, I think, is that show you my new acquisition in terms of a rake of Collett coaches. Chris Inge, who you may remember that I've spoken about his layout before. He's not been able to carry on, unfortunately, and his modelling has gone more in the direction of dioramas and military vehicles and planes. So he's in the process of disposing of various parts of his engaged model railway and accoutrements. And one of the things that I had been looking for was some Collett coaches, which he happened to have. And so I am now the proud owner, if I can get the train running, of 5 Collett coaches with light bars, which I bought from him. And with that came the most amazing amount of other bits and pieces that he's passed on to me, some of which I'll talk about after we do a proper running session with this castle, with its Collett coaches coming round. Because he did send a huge amount of stuff in this box of things that are really useful, and certainly in particular for the timber yard. So let's give the train her voice and go and have a look at her running around the layout. a bit of a GWR feel to the running session this week, because on the other train, as you may have seen, was the Sonic's 56XX pulling its load of wagons around the layout. That's not been run for a while. I had to give it a little bit of a run to get it to run properly, poor thing. Just reminds me, I need to run all my trains more. So let's have a look now at what's going on with the timber yard. And I'm absolutely indebted to one of my subscribers, who's Jim in New York. Well, I don't know if that's New York State or New York City, who made contact to talk about a number of things, one of which I'm going to have a go at, and I'll mention it now. He was talking about his experience of programming CVs. And you may recall that I spoke about the standard 4 tank engine, and that I've been trying to program the Zimo chip in there to calibrate the speed steps so that one step on the controller equaled 1 mile per hour in terms of its scale speed. And he said to me that his experience had been that you need to do all your CV settings in one go and do them in order of CV number, because his experience had been that when you went back in and changed a CV later, it would cause problems with other ones. So I'm going to reset my standard 4 and then go in and do all the CV changes in CV number order to enable me to see if I can get it to run using the facility within the Zimo chip to calibrate the controller. But he also, which was absolutely invaluable, said that his great uncle had run a woodyard and a timber merchant's, and he then helped me understand the order in which the buildings that you see in front of you would have been used. Now, I'm actually running them in the opposite order, but the order through which the wood would pass is that you would have the raw hewn lumber as it arrives here. It would then go into here to be cut up. It would then be set aside to dry before it moved into this building, which is a sanding blower building, to be turned into lumber that could actually be used commercially, at which point it would move into this building with the site office from which sales would be made. So that's the order in which I'm going to be doing things, and you can see that I've started to populate this, including these stacks of sawn lumber, which I've made out of balsa wood. And it's quite hard for you to see some of the things that are on there because they're really quite small. And there are some things on there that Chris Inge has let me have, which I want to show you in a bit more detail. One thing which I've not yet settled where it's going to go, which he sent me, which was one of his earliest scratch builds, if I bring this building up here, which he had in mind to put into a timber yard or some such. I'm going to put it by the canal for the moment. I'm not sure whether it will actually finally live there or whether it might go up to High Elven, because I can see that as a potential workshop up at the station at High Elven. So I'm sort of thinking where that will go. But Chris, thank you very much for that. I think it's a fabulous piece of work. If it was an early scratch build, you know, it just shows how good a modeler you are. So what I'll do now is I'll break and go onto the desk and let you see a bit more detail of the various items of lumber that I'm trying to put together. Now that we're back at the desk, we can take a look at some of the elements that I'm trying to put into the timber yard. First among them are a couple of the things that Chris Inge very kindly sent to me, along with the Colletts that I bought from him. Some really ingenious ways of making up lumber. And as I think I've already said, the just sheer amount of lumber that you need to make a timber yard that looks like a timber yard means you've really got to be able to produce it in significant quantities, or at least enough to make it look as though they're significant quantities. And Chris included some things that he'd made up for him, that was meant to go on his own layout. These are cocktail sticks, which obviously he's painted brown. So that's given me an idea. And these also are cocktail sticks, which he's carved into to make look more like the hewn lumber as it comes straight from the foresters. So behind up here is a remnant packet of cocktail sticks, and I bought another 1200, and I'll see how many of them I need. The main thing is there are huge piles of lumber in a sawmill, in a timber yard, huge piles of them, and I think to make it look right I'm going to need quite a few, but when I come to work on those I'll show you how I go about doing it. Chris also included a scale model scenery kit, which is their timber yard kit, which does make up a number of really quite useful things, but the quantity is nowhere near what you would need to look realistic. I've made up, if I bring this up to the camera because this is rather diddy, the sheet contains in here continuous runs of these individual planks. Let me put this into camera. There we go. Individual planks. And I cut them off in lots of 4 and then stuck them together with spacers underneath to provide a stack of sawn timber. So that's prepared, ready for sale. And I was able to get, I think, 3 which were 4 planks wide and a stack of 4, and 1 which was a stack of 3 out of what I had there. The roof trusses, there's 3 in a row there, 4 in a row there. Ah, yes, 4. So I managed to get 4 roof trusses, which are 3 stuck together to give you the size that you need. There is sheet timber there, which I may or may not use. I'm not sure whether I will. I'll see. There's not that much of it. And so that got me thinking that I really needed to be able to produce a lot of timber. And how might I go about it? Oh, one other thing which Chris sent on to me. This is a wagon load, if I bring it into shot. But I've painted it up and put a bit of weathering on it. I think it looks like a 10 Commandments wagon load by the looks of it. And he sent 4 of those through. And I think if I put them on and surround them with things, I think that will give you a stack of prepared timber ready for sale. So that gets rid of all of those, move those out the way for the moment. And that just left me with thinking, well, how was I going to go about producing substantial amounts of timber at various stages? And the main thing was to try to produce the timber after the logs have just first been sawn. And I thought, well, balsa wood might work quite well there. And I had seen a MärklinofSweden video where he was making a fence to produce planks, which he used balsa wood. And in that, he created a tool to help you slice the balsa wood so that you don't have to cut it all individually by hand, which is quite difficult. And balsa wood has a habit of snapping when you cut by knife, I have discovered. Now, I couldn't be asked to make the tool, but I did have something that would do the same job for me, which is my little razor saw, which you'll have seen me use before. But the reason I bought this version of the razor saw is that it comes, if I bring this up to the screen, it comes with various sized spacers, so that you can have 2 blades, which is what I've done here. And you'll see I've set one blade slightly higher than the other. And what that allows me to do is to create the planks. Now this is a very thin balsa. I would think, well, maybe it's a millimetre. It may be a millimetre balsa. but because it's so thin, it snaps very easily. So I'm supporting it on this board, and essentially all I do is put this up to the board and cut at an angle. And what I find underneath, you will see, I have a plank. Now what I'm cutting here are the spacers that actually stick everything together. So there's two spacers underneath which cut across and glue onto everything, and that's what's holding all this together. I don't glue the individual planks. Now obviously the sawn timber, it has another useful effect. I think I can show you on this one. Because I'm using a saw edge, let me get this into focus, you can see that it does give you a very rough piece of timber. And the beauty of that is that it makes it look much more closer to the logs that have just been sawn before they dry and then go in for sanding and preparation into the more finished timber that would actually be sold directly. The only thing I need to do is that these are very white, and you'll notice these have a nice yellowy colour. This also was picked up from the same MärklinofSweden video that I mentioned before. So I'm using my natural wood colour with a tiny bit of burnt umber, and then I make a wash with that. So I would say it's probably 4 parts of this to 1 part of that, and then a good 7 or 8 parts, maybe even 10 parts water. So it's quite, it is just a wash which dyes them. You throw these into it and then put them out on a piece of paper. The key thing though is these have to dry completely, because if you start sticking the spacers across before these are fully dried, even rocket car glue can't go off because it's on wet. So these have to be completely dry, and then it's just a case of lining 4 of these up, sticking the 2 spacers across, a few dobs of glue, and the job's done. And as you can see, I have made up a load there. I think this will give me another 10 to 12 stacks of 4 of these put together, and that I think then will start to look better when it's sat on the layout. So that's how I'm going about trying to create the lumber and the timber that's going to be on the layout. One thing I did consider, in case somebody asked me, is why am I not using a matchstick? This is a matchstick. Hurrah. That matchstick in scale size is about 2 foot, 18 inches to 2 foot square. Is it 2 foot? No, 18 inches square, which is rather big. Now I may cut some of these down as rather larger pieces of wood that haven't yet been sawn into the smaller pieces. So I may still use some of those and see whether that's what I want to do. But I've got a bit of work ahead of me to create the wood for the timber yard. So that's how I'm going to create all those. Now let's go back to the layout and pick up where we left off. So that gives you some idea of what I'm going to be working on in terms of populating the lumber yard. But the thing I really needed to get on with, and the stuff that I was hoping to sort out when I was at the York, was the scenic materials. So instead I went to Model Scenery Supplies, which is my go-to place really for scenery things, and I spent an interesting and enjoyable time collecting lots of stuff. And by lots of stuff I mean lots of stuff. Oh yes, and I also went on to WWS Scenics to get some mud. Now, I'm not going to go through all these things now, but I will show you them as I come to use them. There's some really interesting material in here which I think will work really well on the banks, the embankments, and also along the edge of the canal which is somewhat unkempt. And I promise, as I do the scenic work, I will film that. I absolutely promise you that. I don't want to find that I've just done it. But that's what I'll be coming to do over the next couple of weeks. So, with that, I think we bring this edition of Elvenhome to an end. If you've liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed, well, please do subscribe, because that way you'll see what I'm going to be doing with all this material that sits in front of me. And if you've got any comments, please do let me have your comments. I'm absolutely indebted to everybody that takes the time to comment, because you're just so helpful. And the knowledge is out there that would take me ages to find otherwise, or not perhaps access at all. So thank you to everyone who comments, and to everyone who just watches the video and who subscribes. But until I speak to you again in about a fortnight's time, that's bye-bye from me. Bye-bye.